Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much indeed for joining us for this session, where we're going to discuss the potential opportunities for legal firms coming out of the SRA reforms and the more general opportunities we all hope to innovate. We've got a fantastic panel here this morning, and the core of this session will once again be focusing on the Q&A with our guests. So I really hope you've got lots of questions for them. But first, can I ask Chris Handford, he is the SRA's Director of Regulatory Policy, to talk us through some of the things the SRA is doing to help give you the flexibility to work in a way that best suits your business. Chris Handford.
Thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying the day so far. I'm just going to set the scene a little bit for this panel session, which will explore our approach to regulation, some of the reforms and the opportunities that there are to do things differently. So some of this has been covered already this morning. Our regulation is changing as the world and legal services sector around us changes as well. We aim to be a proportionate regulator that supports innovation and makes it easy for you and your firm to work in different ways. So we aim to be really clear about the standards that individuals and firms that we regulate are accountable for upholding, but give much more freedom about how you can meet them and not tell you exactly what you can and can't do. So move away from micromanaging. And we have a great panel here of people who are innovating and doing things differently to talk you through some of their experiences in a bit as well. So, to set some context, it is a large and diverse sector. We regulate a record 850,000 solicitors, with a good chunk, as you heard earlier, working in-house. We regulate nearly 10,500 law firms. Of these, over 700 are alternative business structures with non-lawyer owners, managers, and investors. We're seeing more multidisciplinary practices, as was mentioned earlier, where we have solicitors and other professional services being delivered together under the same roof. We're increasingly seeing innovation in the market, new service delivery models, structures, and processes. To give you some examples of the types of things that are changing and that we're seeing. So we're seeing different pricing models with fixed fees on the up. We're seeing more online services and digital offerings. We're seeing legal and data engineering. We're seeing unbundled services where the lawyer will provide part of the service on a case and the client will do some of the work themselves as well. We're seeing things like subscription services, where for a monthly or annual fee, then people can purchase a fixed bundle or type of services. We're seeing much more flexible working and virtual law firms, which I think we'll cover in the panel discussion, and was raised in some of the pre-submitted questions as well. We're seeing things like lawyers being used and paralegals being used on an as-needed basis by both companies for their in-house offering and also by other firms. So why are we seeing this? Well, innovation is driven by all sorts of different things. First of all, demands of consumers, what your clients want, potential clients want. New ideas and new money coming into the sector. Sometimes driven by the changes in legislation that has allowed, and regulation that has allowed alternative business structures and multidisciplinary practices. So new expertise, new money, new ideas coming in. Of course, we're seeing technological advancements. And we're seeing competition, and that includes from the unregulated sector that Paul referenced earlier, estimated to be worth around 25% of the market. And of course, we see firms that are just wanting to be more efficient, to improve the services that you offer and to grow profits, and really importantly, to keep the workforce happy, to be able to recruit and retain good quality staff. So, as I said, we'll hear more from the panelists about this in a little while. So, to use this slide again, so how do we approach regulation against this backdrop? So we have two real aims, as I see it. So we want rules that can keep up with the changing world without constant changes. I'm very conscious that we're on version 20 of the current handbook that came in 2011. I'm also very conscious that research that has been done still shows that regulation and uncertainty about regulation can be a real barrier from firms and solicitors taking opportunities and trying to do things differently. We want to set an environment that allows, facilitates, and encourages innovation. And especially if it can help people get access to services who aren't getting services now. So can innovation lead to services being delivered in a different way and people buying those services or accessing those services? We're not trying to force you to change. We don't have a preference for particular business models or structures. It's up to you whether you do change and take advantage of some of the flexibilities. You could stick with what you do and what you do well now. You could evolve, or you could do something more revolutionary. Our aim really is to give you the flexibility to exercise those choices. So we want to ensure high professional standards. That remains at the core of what we do. But beyond that, we want to get out of the way, to let you organize yourselves and deliver services in a way that works for you, for your clients, and for your prospective clients. As this slide shows, we have been moving in that direction for some time, including improving our authorization processes to make it easier to have different business models and stripping out over 200 pages of rules as part of our red tape challenges. And there's more to come with our current reforms. So we have reviewed and redrafted the entire handbook. So all 450 pages, all 20-odd sets of rules. We're trying to be clear on the purpose of each rule and then set it out in the easiest, clearest, most fuss-free way possible. So we have tried to remove requirements that aren't needed to ensure high professional standards or to protect the public, and also to be organised rationally. For example, reporting requirements all set out in one place. At the moment, they're spread across several pages and several different sets of rules. That's not very easy to negotiate. In the new world, we'll have about 130 pages. And just to give you a point of reference, in 1974, the entire rule book was about 120 pages. So still a little bit above that. So the idea really is to have less, but for it to be better and to be easier to use. It's a real opportunity to take stock of what you're doing now, have a look at those new rules, the new standards and regulations, and see if there's anything that you want to do differently. Is there anything you're doing now only because we say you have to do it now? Or anything that you aren't doing only because we say you can't do it? That might have changed, so have a look at our rules. So I'll just highlight a few areas. Some have already been covered today. So we have the revised principles, the 7 core elements of ethical behaviour that apply to all those that we regulate, to individuals, to firms, to managers, employees, and that can go beyond the practice of law. New codes of conduct, one for individual solicitors, whoever they are, wherever they practice, and one for authorised firms. We have new authorisation rules. This is one of the areas that has changed quite a lot. Again, we've split the rules by individual authorisation and firms authorisation to make it easier to navigate and understand and find the relevant bits for you. We've also been through and just looked at anything that doesn't look like it needs to be there and taken it away. So one of the examples given earlier was around if you're an approved role holder. At the moment, you have to be reapproved if you move to a different firm or to a different role. That changes in the future. I was at a round table of pro bono lawyers the other week, and for them, it's very difficult to negotiate our rules. So these are people who are working in law firms, working in-house, who want to give up some of their time to offer services for free. At the moment, because the way our authorisation rules are set out, it's very difficult to negotiate and do that because there isn't something that covers that scenario. In the future, it will be much clearer. If you're a lawyer, you can operate in different ways much more easily. So taking away a lot of the complexity that makes life difficult now. We've simplified the accounts rules. This is really one of the huge changes that we've made. As mentioned earlier, very, very complex prescriptive rules at the moment, over 40-odd pages. Half of firms that submit accountants' reports are shown to be in breach of those rules at the moment, but we don't take action very often. So we've taken away some of those things around specifying the numbers of days that you have to do things, exactly how you have to do things. 48 hours to pay a check-in. I mean, why is that the right number? And think of the impact of that for rural firms where there aren't banks very close by. So some of those changes should release the burden, but not have any detrimental effect on clients. Third-party managed accounts. We've been very clear that these can be used for those that want to as an alternative to handling client money. So these are third-party escrow-type accounts that are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. At the moment, it's a bit of the rules don't explicitly say whether you can or you can't. In the future, it'll be very clear that you can use those if you want to. We've also clarified the definition of client money and introduced an exception from having a client account if the only fees that you hold are for payments on account and for unpaid professional disbursements. So if you do have a client account, you'll still have to pay those client monies in, but if that's all that you hold, then you'll no longer have to have a client account if you don't want to. And again, as referenced earlier, we're lifting some of the restrictions about how and where solicitors can practice to give more choice for solicitors, more opportunity for solicitors, and more choice for clients. So we'll have freelancers who won't need to be authorised as a firm, as a recognised sole practice, if they're genuinely working on their own. So if they don't have partners, they don't have employees, they're engaging directly with the client, then they'll be able to do that based on their authorization as a solicitor. They won't also have to be a recognized sole practice. And as we've referenced earlier, solicitors will be able to deliver certain legal services in different types of businesses, including those that we don't regulate. So this, again, will provide opportunity for solicitors and also choice for consumers. So the final thing I want to cover is around our innovation initiative that we already have in place. So there's no need to wait if you want to make changes now, if you want to try new things, perhaps inspired by the examples given by our panel today. So get in touch. There are things that we can do now to support through our SRA Innovate initiative. And we know that lots of people are wanting to innovate. There's a figure there of 22% of legal service providers have introduced an innovation. There's new research that was out last month showing that that's still there. 25% of firms introducing innovation. Lots of different reasons for that. What can we do? Well, first of all, we can offer guidance and support. Most people, most firms, most solicitors want to do things differently and assume that they can't do it because of regulation. We'll actually find when they come and speak to us that they can do it already. So we can offer guidance and support them with that. Help through the authorization process. We can do things like writing a letter to clarify regulatory position for a potential investor or a potential insurer. And then we have waivers. If there's a rule that stops you from doing something, but there aren't risks and there can be real benefits, then we can waive our rules, and we can do that in a controlled way to pilot changes and keep an eye on kind of what's happening. Just to give you some examples of the types of things that we've seen and helped with. So we've helped businesses understand how they can operate a virtual office, so where they don't have a physical presence on the high street or whatever else, but have lots of people working at home, for example. So how that works with things like maintaining confidentiality and being clear to your clients about the model that you're operating. We've had examples of a firm who had many legal aid clients, and then with legal aid scope cuts, wanted to investigate whether they could use crowdfunding as a way to still deliver services to clients. So we offered advice through that process. We also had examples of small firms or non-legal, non-regulated firms wanting to offer some services of practicing solicitor. So to give you one example of that, there's a practicing or a previously practicing solicitor that set up an au pair placement service and wanted to give advice as a solicitor to the families that were taking au pairs around their obligations as an employer. So we granted a waiver to allow that to happen. So things that can be done now, please come and speak to us if there's changes that you want to make. And now I think we'll go back to the panel and hear some of the real-life examples of how people are taking advantage of our approach and hopefully give you some ideas of things that you could do.
Great. Yeah. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Chris Handford there. So how does all this look from the perspective of you guys, the legal firms? Well, our panel comprises 3 solicitors who are all doing different innovative things in running their businesses. First, Sarah Goulbourne is a co-founder of Gunnercooke. The firm was an idea that developed in a coffee shop in 2010. And with an interesting model and structure, it's now one of the fastest growing challenger firms, law firms in the country. Peter Lee is CEO of Wavelength Law, a long-standing commercial lawyer. He also has experience of the British Army and is a scientist. They describe themselves at Wavelength as legal engineers. And Gary Gallen is CEO and founder of rradar. With a background as a distinguished corporate defense lawyer, he set up rradar 6 years ago, run from his conservatory. Since then, it's grown, as anything would in a conservatory, rapidly into a multi-office, multi-award-winning firm, which describes itself as giving law back to the people. It's great to have you all. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I want to open with a question to all of you guys. Sarah from Gunnercooke, what opportunities do you think the SRA's approach and reforms offers those in the legal sector? And could you give an example of how your firm is innovating?
Okay, thanks. I think the changes in the rules that the SRA and the government made back in 2010 through the Legal Services Act allowed us to make real the idea that we had around delivering commercial legal services differently to clients. We decided, and it was a very early stage to do this, to be an ABS, and that allowed us to give some equity to a non-lawyer, a finance person who helped us enormously in guiding us in setting up a new business. So I think the ABS rules were really helpful, allowing us to do that. I think secondly, the SRA were really helpful in the early days. I mean, we were setting up a firm where when I was the Culp and Coffer, there were just 2 of us, so I assumed those roles. I had to read the code of conduct and basically work out how I could structure the firm to ensure that we adhered to all the code. And what I did was I basically asked the SRA to come in, and we presented to them our model and said, you know, are we doing it right? What could we do differently? What could we do better? And they were very, very helpful. And so that idea of a regulator and trying to keep them at arm's length, I didn't go with that, and I embraced them. And we have a head of compliance who deals a lot with our SRA contact. So I think communication with your regulator when you're setting up a new idea and you're not sure about things is absolutely key. Don't be afraid to ask, because at worst they're going to say, well, no, but try it this way. I mean, Gunnercooke now has 200 lawyers working flexibly and remotely from across the UK and actually abroad as well. It's all about the client and what the clients want. And in commercial legal services, what we found clients wanted was certainty of price. So we built the model, giving clients certainty of price where they needed it. Initially, that was on non-contentious matters, where I think it is more common to see certainty of price. As the firm's developed, we've taken on contentious lawyers, so we have a big commercial litigation team. They struggle more with certainty of price as an offering because of the constraints of the costs rules around the court regulations. But I think it is changing. And I think as more and more clients are looking for certainty of price, and the transparency rules, I think, are talking about that now that the SRA are launching, you've got to listen to the clients. Clients want to know how much their legal services are going to cost. It's really, really important to them. And so to build a business model around that is fantastic. The challenge, I think, for an existing law firm is where you've remunerated and rewarded on time charged, there's a challenge and a natural tension, which is difficult.
All right, okay. Peter at Wavelength, your response, SRA's approach, how's that helping the legal profession? And maybe you think it's hindering the legal profession, I don't know. What you think of that, and an example of how perhaps your firm is innovating.
I'll probably echo some of those thoughts. And at Wavelength, we are a regulated law firm, but we describe ourselves as the first firm in the world of regulated legal engineers. So the firm's now almost 25 people. We started in Cambridge, and the idea is to get lawyers, data scientists, technologists, and creative designers together to focus on specific problems in the legal sector. And in order to pull together that array of talent, one of the big advantages that we've used is the ABS structure. That's allowed us to be a company limited by shares, which in turn has allowed us to set up a share option pool. And that's been great for attracting talent. And it's allowed us to have some parity, I think, between people who are solicitors and those people who aren't solicitors but are equally talented in the area of work that we're in. It's something that I found a bit odd when I transitioned from science and then being a soldier into being a solicitor in the firms I worked at. And I think that the new rules allow that a bit more flexibility there. Do I think it's hindering the profession? A little bit, actually. We come across unregulated firms quite a lot. We also come across lots of technology-led businesses that are trying to deliver services differently in the space. And there are a few quirks and disadvantages. It's much harder for us as a regulated law firm to raise money, for example. We found that as a quirk of some of the rules. So in some ways, yes. But I think the final thing I'll say on this particular question is, I think there are many, many firms out there that are still partnerships and LLPs. And contrary to what a lot of commentators say, I really don't think that model's broken at all. I think it's interesting that there are now ABSs. I think collectively, regulated firms, whether they're partnerships, LLPs, or companies, as well as the unregulated businesses, it just seems to be pushing the innovation agenda along. And we've noticed over the last 2 years a lot more creativity in the sector from all firms.
Interesting. Gary, at Radar, how have these changes affected you, and give us some examples?
Of course. Well, I think in terms the changes are definitely helping. I think we've got a regulator that accepts change is inevitable, and their attitude is one of trying to help the profession. But I definitely believe in helping yourself and not waiting for the regulator or for others to help architect your future and opportunity. With the regulator, I sometimes find that incredibly helpful, and we've had great support from them. We had an innovative model at Radar which caused some issues with the SRA understanding that model. So what I had to do is what I've often had to do with clients, which is, look, I'll go down to you, spend a day in the office, and with a lot of coloured pens and a flip chart, drew the model. Right. Answered all the questions openly, and he said, we understand what you want to license, why you want to be an ABS.
Briefly, what's the model?
I'm going to go into that now.
Okay.
But they were willing to listen and understood and accepted what we were talking about, and we got over it. But pace and that openness of communication can sometimes frustrate. My view is that as a profession, we have our destiny in our own hands. I'm a great lover of the law, and I think what the law can do as a protector and what it means for society, but also that we need to be better at communication and education about the law. So as a criminal specialist regulatory, I'd found that both from prosecuting, defending and investigating, inevitably when you would complete a case, the client would grab you by the collar and say, what do we have to do with you to make sure we never have to go through that process again? So it was putting more and more of a focus on what we know, the experience and the expertise that we have, and that intellectual property that we have in the legal profession is incredibly potent. But how do we communicate that and get it into the hands of customers, clients, in a relevant way to help them? So the rradar model was taking that intellectual property, that know-how and that expertise, and actually using the regulatory standards, the professional conduct and the rules, and the fact that we are qualified, professional experience, and the full legal service to our advantage. So rather than a disadvantage, actually marketing and using that as a key communication tool to the marketplace. That what we will then use technology to shape our knowledge and our content, and then a teaching and an education business. So we built 3 divisions of the business, a law firm, but we have over 30 coders, developers, multimedia design and technologists in the business. More recently, more data scientists helping clients understand the value of their data with our own data, and how putting the two together makes for a much smarter business model, both for the client as well as us as a law firm, building together. But a key was bringing in teachers and educators, because the technicians, the technologists use their own language. Us lawyers still revert to our own language. And it's about taking those two and combining legal acumen with technology delivery to put it in the hands of a client to help them more effectively. You can't have a great relationship if you're not having a conversation. So we need to be communicating constantly and sharing. And so building the rradar model that's a risk-reward radar that's showing people how to navigate legal services on a proactive basis is how we've built our methodology. And we've found the regulator incredibly supportive as they've watched and seen us grow. We have many tens of thousands of people that now work on our platform. We're very collaborative. So we share a lot of knowledge with the insurance sector, with brokers, with financial institutions, helping their clients avoid legal pitfalls.
Right.
But there's a change of attitude that we had to bring to the lawyers that we recruited into the practice. So we
had to twist a few arms, did you?
A little. So we have, I think we're just touching 150 at the moment and continuing to grow. Right. And a couple of acquisitions that we're doing at the moment to allow us to grow quicker. But what we find is if we can communicate more effectively with the clients, so we constantly are looking at how do we use the technology to get more relevant day-to-day support to clients. And we find actually that rather than that not provide work and opportunity to us, by the clients understanding our qualification, our experience, our expertise, our accessibility, that drives a greater level of communication and more work into our practice.
Okay. Great. Really, really interesting real-world examples. So, questions for our panelists here. Yes, a lady at the back there. Hi, if you get the microphone to her. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. It's Linda Lee from Radcliffe Brassers again. Sorry.
Don't worry, don't worry.
I'm troubled about a lot of this, because what troubles me is that a lot of firms, it's great that firms want to innovate. A lot of firms are innovating but don't describe it as innovating. But the vast majority of firms are terrified of putting a foot wrong, because they have clients who want their services. They want to give their services to the clients. And yet the regulator keeps changing things, so they don't know where the goalposts are. So, for example, in the new Code of Conduct, we've moved from material breach to serious breach. Is that the same thing? If it is, why isn't it called that? Or is it something different? Now, your research showed that the biggest barrier to innovation was fear and uncertainty. So what are the SRA going to do to get firms up to that base level where they feel confident to do things differently if they choose to or not, rather than saying, look, there's all these, great shiny things over here, because that's what I want the SRA to do for the majority of firms that I know.
Chris, yes. Is there a potential conflict between the need to innovate and the need to protect clients and protect the public by having a very powerful and tough regulatory body?
So, well, I think you have both. what we've tried to do with the new standards and new regulations is to be really, really clear on what those standards are and which firms will be held accountable for. And that's the sort of things around the principles, the codes we talked about earlier, that the public really expect us to regulate and regulate well. What we've tried to do is lift out a lot of the detail about exactly what firms can and can't do, what solicitors can and can't do. What we've tried to do in the past is almost try and anticipate what different business models might arise and then carve bits out and have very detailed rules describing them and saying you can do this bit, you can't do that bit. And it gets out of date very, very quickly. So by lifting everything up a level, so being very, very focused on those standards, but not having that next level of prescription and detail, it should make things, well, future-proof them so people do get that certainty. We'll also publish the enforcement strategy, so we have that coherent picture between the standards that we expect and then why we might take enforcement action, what we think serious, not serious, etc. So you can have total transparency between here are the standards and here's our approach to enforcement. And we also do things like we publish our internal decision-making guidance. So what are SRA staff seeing? What are they being guided by when a report comes into them about a standards issue? So I think that we're trying to future-proof things, trying to be clear. And when you transition, there will be some grey areas, and we will have support and toolkits to help with that. And we'll take views from those that we regulate about the areas that we need to cover.
Does that answer your question?
No. It's a very simple thing. I mean, I can understand what you're saying about stripping everything out. I've read the code, I understand it, but there seems to be changes for change's sake. So I gave you the very simple example. Is a material breach the same as a serious breach? That's what I'm under a duty to report. But you've changed the wording. Does that mean it means something different? Why change the wording? What guidance are you going to give so people are clear? Because it's all very well saying we've stripped it out and it's clearer. It's actually harder in some respects when you read it to work out what it is that you are meant to do.
So the way that we've drafted, we have tried to use more everyday language. We will offer support, so in areas such as that, if that's an area where people need support, then we can put that out there and we can have a frequently asked question or something around that. So we want to get views on where those grey areas are, where people need some help. And in the transitional period, as people move from being used to the old way things are drafted to the new, then that support can be there, and we think in the future it will be needed less, and there will need to be less changes to what's there on a regular basis.
All right, gentleman at the back there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
This is, I think, a question for Chris. The three examples that we've got are great, but they all seem to come from a commercial bias. I don't know what the makeup of the audience is here. I'm guessing it's predominantly smaller high streets. So, Chris, how do those examples translate to us smaller firms?
Good question.
Well, what we're trying to do is to make things easy for anybody who wants to try things differently. The kind of questions that we get asked and people approaching us are from all different types of providers. So I gave the legal aid example earlier around the crowdfunding. I know, for example, I don't know if Gary wants to say anything about how he started, but you started as a criminal practitioner. So there's opportunities for all different types of practices. The information that we'll maintain on the SRA Innovate website, which we will hope to be revamping soon as well, it will have some case studies from all different types of practice that should be relevant to everybody. And also, just to pick up on one last thing, the government funding that was mentioned earlier that we have won to try and improve or to help find some data-driven solutions to access to justice problems. We'll have prize funds for firms working perhaps with others, tech companies, whatever, to deliver different solutions. And there'll be a real focus there on not just being big commercial firms, but trying to build something that can be of benefit to smaller firms as well.
Thank you. Can I just make a suggestion for next year? Is that on the panel you have somebody from a smaller high street practice which is innovated? Just a suggestion.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. Do you want to get in there?
Just on Chris's point, he did allude to the fact that I come from a high street background. I spent the longest period of my career setting up and creating with 2 others a small high street practice in Scunthorpe of all places. And as a criminal and regulatory lawyer there, actually starting with green form back then, and going through Nary courts and the changes, serious fraud panel and things. The skill set that I'd accumulated, however, was very relevant in the corporate world, so the gentleman's quite right. I've now providing a service in the corporate arena. But my background I haven't found as a hindrance, and in fact, the large international law firm that wanted me to go and join them, it was those high street skills and that hands-on experience in the police stations and the courtrooms and dealing with the murders and the terrorism and the corporate crime and the serious fraud that gave me the skills that actually the large corporate firm didn't have. So when it needed that service for its corporate clients, it was looking for high street lawyers with the ability to transition. What I learned then in that practice was the same thing, that actually when I had a client in the cells, they wanted to know what were they in for, could I get them off, and were they going to get bail? The last thing was, do you have any fags as well? So if there's any criminal lawyers in there, they'll know where I'm coming from. It was the same needs, however, for the large global corporate clients. That's what they were interested in. They weren't interested in the law, they weren't interested in the technology, they were interested in an outcome. So high street background I didn't actually find as a hindrance. I actually found that decade plus of experience that helped me perfect the model that I'm pursuing now.
Okay, gentleman there.
Yeah,
Hi there.
Tawfiq Mada from Highfield Limited. I would like to ask Peter.
You're speaking to the microphone, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Tawfiq Mada from Highfield Limited. I would like to ask a question to Peter Lee. From soldier to scientist to solicitor. I would like to know how did you convert from those two?
Don't forget the microphone.
Hi, Peter.
So, Peter, I think he wants to know your career trajectory, which is an interesting one.
I haven't finished though.
Oh,
I just.
That's why you got to use the microphone, mate.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Basically, I went through the same stages as you did, but I'm still not qualified. Just a partner in my firm. I did my law degree. I couldn't finish the LPC because of health reasons. I would like to know how did you qualify from soldier to scientist, and after that you become solicitor running a fantastic firm.
Okay.
Yeah, I can, very briefly, I qualified as I worked as a marine biologist for a short period of time, and then joined the British Army. And it was the period of Blair's Wars, so we were very expeditionary as a nation, including tours that I went on to Kosovo and Iraq. And I fought in the Iraq War in 2003, and that was my sort of legal epiphany, if you like, because I witnessed societal breakdown and the importance of the rule of law. One of our first jobs in the area that I was responsible for was to recruit judges and some of the police force as well. So that was my vision to go and become a solicitor, if you like. And then I left the army and retrained with a firm called Bird & Bird in the city. But I think that, what I've, maybe just to extend that slightly into this innovation discussion, what I've found is that, the law and lawyers are a very eclectic bunch. People study law at university typically because they're curious, and they tend to have a very interesting array of backgrounds. Also, you can convert to become a lawyer, of course, with another prior degree. What I found is that there's a lot of frustrated lawyers out there who are sort of, post-qualification. And we found that introducing new career paths for people, such as legal engineers, we've got legal designers, for example, in our business who are also qualified solicitors, but are very creative. It's incredibly fulfilling for them, and it creates happy people who can deliver really good services to clients. So, looking around at your colleagues in your firm and trying to unlock some of that eclectic skill that they have deep within them is really valuable.
Lovely. Thanks for that question. Thank you. Sir.
James Shepherd from the Law Society here. It's a question for Chris based on your handbook presentation. Just considering that when the handbook comes in, we'll have different regulations, different protections if you're a freelance solicitor, for instance. What are you doing about public legal education around that area? Because it sounds like from what we've heard so far, is that solicitor will have to convey those protections or the differing levels of protections to consumers of legal services. So I'm just thinking, are the SRA going to be proactive and help to try and educate the public as well in that regard?
Yes. So there's various things that we're doing. So we have the digital badge that was introduced a few days ago, which will help regulated firms distinguish themselves from firms that aren't regulated. When a potential client clicks through on that badge, it will give a list in simple language about the protections, the benefits, if you like, of going to a regulated solicitor. We are also doing work through our consumer-facing website that we run on behalf of all of the legal regulators, so including the Bar, Council for Licensed Conveyance, etc., to get messages through that way. Importantly, we've been doing focus groups and work with charities and consumer groups where clients or people with a problem are likely to go in the first instance, and they'll get information that way as well. We're also doing things like developing what's sort of our equivalent of a dentist smile guide, if you like. So a simple guide of what you should expect from a solicitor and what you get from going to a regulated solicitor. So we're doing quite a lot on this front. We're testing things with the public. The digital badge, I've seen some comments about the design of it, but that was actually brought about with testing with the public about what they liked, what they thought represented sort of protection and regulatory protection, and whether they were more likely to go to a firm with that badge than one without them. So we're doing a lot of work in this area. Very happy to talk to the Law Society, and do talk to your colleagues about how we can get information out. We comment on various things that the Law Society do and put out there as well. So we're doing lots. I think we can work with the Law Society to do stuff, and also firms can do things as well to get information out there.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed for that. Sarah, if I can ask you, I mean, talking about innovation, your firm works on a very different model, and you talked about clients wanting certainty of price, as anyone would. But your partnership structure, you've got no hourly rates, for instance. It's not a typical partnership structure. How has that gone down, bearing in mind we know what the figures are? You know, majority of people, if they need a lawyer, don't end up going to a solicitor. They think they're too expensive. You know, there seem to be all these inbuilt prejudices against the profession. I just wonder how your changes have influenced all that, perhaps.
I think because we wanted to put clients' interests first and listen to clients, and the overriding result of those conversations when we set up was, we just need to know how much this is going to cost. And I accept it's commercial legal services, but very small businesses, owner-managed businesses, many of our clients are owner-managed businesses, you know, one-man bands maybe. So, but overriding, they wanted to know how, and they needed to know how much it costed. So we had to build the model based on that and work back from it and talk about value. And listen to a client and say, okay, what's your budget? So if a client's got a certain amount of money, then we have to think about that and not base it on how long it's going to take us, because that's actually not relevant. To the client, they need an output based on a certain price. And as long as you're clear and transparent with the client about what you're giving them up front, and scope it along the way. Scoping is a really important part of a fixed certainty of price model, where you have to be really clear in your initial client care letter what you are doing and what you can do for the price that you're offering. And that's often a struggle for a lawyer, because they're going to say, but hang on, I don't know which way this is going to go, or I don't know what the other side are going to be like. So we say, well, let's break it down. So we believe in actually scoping the job and delivering it in bite-sized pieces and giving certainty along the way, so that as a case or a transaction progresses, we can see where it's going and actually say, well, we can price it to here, and then we can give you a choice. Do you want to go this way or that way? And yes, it takes longer initially, but the client satisfaction is so much more, because you're involving them, you are giving them choices, you're empowering the client in a way that the idea of just sending off a bill to a client at the end of a job and hoping that they're going to pay it, I mean, I don't feel that's a realistic way of offering commercial legal services anymore, I'm afraid.
Interesting, very interesting indeed. One final question for our panelists. It's a lady there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jo Riddick, McFarlane's. When you set up, insofar as you're offering, this question for the panel, insofar as you're offering non-reserved activities, did you consider setting up an unregulated business? And are you considering making your businesses unregulated when you will be able to employ solicitors in them?
Interesting. Gary?
From our point of view, no, we'll stay regulated, and we see it as...
that's a USP, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great advantage. And to be able to have the holistic model, and to be one of the earlier presenters talked, or one of the questions that from the floor came about those that are in the non-regulated sector working in the legal sector. The clients that I've worked with for more than 20 years in commercial terms do like the fact that we are regulated, and we are winning business on promoting that and being very clear that the education and the proactive advice, what you could potentially class and could be non-regulated services, is more valid, relevant, useful, and something they'll pay a subscription for and access, because it comes from actual practitioners that do the work. And we are a practicing litigation firm. And so the fact that what we advise and what we reflect through the technology side and the teaching and education side of the business could come that morning from something that we've done in a court case, that's of huge relevance to our clients. So actually the full integrated model is something that we will retain, and it's harder for competition to compete with that. So we wouldn't give up a USP. And a little bit like Sarah, we gave up fixed fees years ago. We gave up fixed fees when I was in private practice inside legal firms for large corporate clients that I was working with. And when I built Radar from 2011 onwards, we don't work on that model either. But no, we won't give up the qualification. We want to continue practicing the litigation. From there, we're getting the most incisive and relevant real-time issues of what's going wrong, where things businesses need to be supported, and that powers more learning through the model.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, it's a really pertinent question for us, because none of the legal services we deliver are on that list. So we've struggled really hard, actually, at the beginning about whether we should become regulated or not. We decided to become regulated, and there's disadvantages and advantages to it. And I think just to tie in with an earlier question about fear, what I've noticed about fear generally is it splits the camp. You either get people who just freeze and don't do anything, or some people who think a lot more clearly and in depth about something. And what I've found actually is being regulated as a business owner makes me think much more deeply about our business model and our opportunities. And I think that gives you much more, a much stronger business model that has more chance of succeeding. An interesting other note actually about being regulated, one thing we have noticed is that our clients, whether they're law firms, actually we do work with some law firms, and also in-house teams, they're much more comfortable sharing their data with us, their documents, their contracts and things, because we are regulated. It gives them a much greater degree of confidence. And we need their data because we analyze it with machine learning tools and AI tools and things like that. And being regulated gives them a much higher degree of confidence.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Sarah?
For us, it was an absolute requirement to be regulated. The clients would have expected that and still would and will always want that. I think it's a real badge of trust and security to give to a client, to say that you're regulated, to know that there's a whole raft of regulation and compliance behind you gives clients huge security and comfort. And I think that's a huge opportunity for the profession, actually, to show that and demonstrate that and give people that quality assurance. So, yeah.
Chris, two-tier system.
Sorry?
Two-tier system.
Two-tier system. Well, I think this is covered in one of the earlier sessions. Don't think it's a
Pass that buck.
Yeah. I don't think it's a too.
But you've heard from our panelists here. You know, it's a badge of integrity, of honesty, of trust. People are willing to share their data. There's a sense that there's something up there and it's regulated, and there may be something somewhere else and it's unregulated.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is around the choices, isn't it? So people can choose to go to a regulated firm, and some of the decisions that they will make are some of the things that we see coming through here. But solicitors in any of the business models that we talked about, they are still regulated. They're still bound by a code of conduct. There's still protections in place. So some people may choose to go to those, and others won't. And back to the information point, if we do all we can to help people make those choices, then we think it will give access to qualified solicitors who are bound by a code of conduct.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Gary, Peter, Chris and Sarah, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Now, folks, lunch is being served in Hall 3, and also this year we have some bite-sized sessions taking place in the exhibition theatres in Hall 3. So grab lunch and make your way over there if you're interested. The conference will resume again at 13:50. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.